Hello everybody, welcome back to the Sales on Demand Show. This is episode 134. Today, I want to talk about, is this really the worst time in history? Because, well, everybody on Twitter seems to think so, but realistically, I don't really agree with that. So, May, yard cleanup, springtime, my favorite month of the year. Particularly the last half of May, because, as you probably know, in Canada we get about 2.5 months of summer and 9 months of winter. I mean, I'm not joking. It's not an exaggeration. Winter basically ends in the middle of May, and it begins in the middle of September, maybe the end of September. Sometimes we get an extra month at the end of summer before it snows again. Sometimes we don't. I can recall years where every single weekend in September had a snowstorm. So, yeah. Been building some garden beds. Trying something a little bit different. Something called a hugelkultur. If you've never heard of this, you build like a raised bed. Now, you can do this in the ground, too. So you can dig out a big bunch of dirt, and you have to put a bunch of wood into the hole. Of course, you can always just build up and do like a raised bed thing, which is what I did. But you bury the wood in the dirt, and it starts to rot. And the rotting wood provides food for plants that you plant on top of it. So I've built one hugelkultur bed this year, and I don't have any more wood to build another one, but I plan on building another one as soon as I have enough wood. And I also have the biggest pile of compost that I think I've ever had in my entire life. I don't know how all of this compost came to be. I've got so much vegetation around my yard, like tree branches and just leaf mulch and grass and everything. I basically take all of my grass and leaves and I dump them on a pile. So I have a huge tree in my backyard. I kind of want to get rid of it, but it's also providing a lot of, organic material for gardening, which is nice. So anyway, it's a fun time of year. I love cleaning up my yard. I love yard work. I have no issues with going out all day long and just doing yard work. I love it. The sun, the warm air, even if it's a little cool, I still love it. And I, spend as much time outdoors as I can. I just wish that spring lasted all year long because, it just doesn't last very long. All right, so of course, if you want to join my bootcamp series and get 5 free videos on how to start your own print-on-demand business, you can do that today at salesondemandshow.com/start. Doesn't cost you anything. Just throw your email in there and you'll get 5 videos that show you how to go through all of the steps of setting up a print-on-demand business, basically. I also wanted to update on this. I was talking last week about Amazon ads, and I've been learning and perfecting my knowledge on Amazon ads. I've always thought of myself as being pretty good at advertising on Amazon. I've been doing it for a long time. Would I call myself an expert? Yeah, I'd call myself an expert. At least I would now. We are currently running advertising for one listing that is precious jewelry from Gear Bubble. And it's going well. It's going quite well. I'm just perfecting the strategy. I'm finding ways to scale up. I'm getting between, there's some days where I get 2 sales and some days I get 5 or 6 sales. So it's kind of up and down, but I'm slowly building that number up. And of course, right now, there's not a lot going on that people are buying for, except for maybe graduation. So hopefully by the time Christmas rolls around, we will have a lot of momentum on that product, and I'll be able to make a lot of money from it. Now, I really want to try this on my own account. I'm just using someone else's account right now, which is fine, but I have brand registry on my Amazon store. So I've been working on like creating some branding and stuff, and now I want to put that in practice and really get that running. So that's going to be a summer project. I'm not giving a lot of time to it because I don't have a lot of time, but it's going really well. And of course, we have a training program on that, and we're going to be opening that up to the public very soon. Here, we have an initial few members going through that training program, but we'll have a wider launch coming up probably in the summertime. We're going to be bringing in affiliates, and I'm going to be an affiliate for it, of course, because I'm the one teaching it. But I have to stress that the knowledge is not just my knowledge, and it's not just my knowledge plus Gear Bubble's knowledge. The people that are teaching this and giving us this information, these guys have made $100 million selling these products, which is a lot. Aphrodite's by itself has made 55 million in the couple of years it's been operating, and they just made somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million over the Mother's Day period with just a few products, just on Amazon. And they have other ads running as well, but the Amazon strategy is working particularly well. So we're going to be teaching that, and it is a little bit complex. I want to say that it's more complex than what I normally do, but it is something that is achievable by the average person, right? You don't have to be a big business to do this. And the proof is with me. Like, I'm only getting the strategy. Nobody's actually doing any of the work for me. I'm doing all of the work and just following the instructions, and it's working great. Now, I do have a pretty solid background in Amazon ads, so it wasn't hard for me to go through the steps, and, I have some intuition about, what should work and what shouldn't work that the average person might not have, but we're going to teach all of that in the course, right? We're going to give you all of the tools that you need to be successful. All right, so let's get into this. Is this really the worst time in history? Like, if you go on Twitter, like, man, there's some times where I can't go on social media because it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. There's too much doom and gloom. One of those times was during COVID, where everybody just kept talking about, stay home, stay safe, cases are rising, all of this, blah, 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 blah. And yet, I'd go outside and, last summer I would go for a run and I'd see people on the walking paths and they didn't appear to be too worried. I'd walk into a store, not wearing a mask, of course, because after about April of 2021, I just stopped wearing a mask. I was already vaccinated, so I was like, you know what? I got the vaccine. I'm not wearing a mask anymore. And I didn't. And nobody really seemed that concerned about it. Everybody just kind of understood that we got to just get through this nonsense, and we did. We got through it, didn't we? Like, we're kind of on the other side of COVID. I never thought that would ever happen. Honestly, I just thought this COVID thing would keep going and going and going. Now, I'm not even going to mention what it is, but you all know something happened terrible over the last week or even the last 48 hours. It was awful. People died, and people who didn't deserve to die died, and it sucks. But I'm the kind of person that I'm actually able to separate myself from the tragedies of the world around me. And I don't know how I do that because there's so much going on. And sometimes it does get to me. But I think maybe it's the fact that I'm German or something like that, and at some point you just have to be like, okay, I'm disconnecting from this nonsense. And you just do it. You just take your brain and you say, I'm shutting off the social media, I'm shutting off the terror. And there's a little bit of perspective that goes into this as well. So, although there are tragedies and terrible things that happen all the time, like every week it's like something bad happens. Russia invades Ukraine. Somebody drives their car through the parade. People die in a shooting. COVID kills people. History is filled with misery. And I think about this a lot. And I probably think about it more than is really... I don't know, maybe I think about this too much, but I read a lot of history, and one of my favorite topics, and favorite, I mean, I'm just fascinated by this time period, is the wars, like World War I, World War II, but, in particular World War II. And I think there's some fascination with, like, the aircraft and the machines, the tanks, the military strategy, the culture of the time period. It's just a really fascinating period. I love reading stories. I've got a whole shelf full of books with both real and fictional stories from World War II, of people in the Merchant Marines. My own grandfather, he was a gunner on an actual Halifax bomber, was shot down over France, was captured and escaped. Like, wild stories like this. And, you watch movies like The Enemy at the Gates, which is all about the battle for Stalingrad, where just, like, literally millions of people just died. Just never had a chance. And I realized that really wasn't that long ago. And we may never have something like that again. At least I don't think we're going to have something like that again. Not in that way. And even all of the bad things that happen now, they don't compare to the misery that people have endured. Like, just imagine being a slave in the Roman Empire. Imagine being, living in the Irish potato famine, where, 1 million Irish people starved to death because they didn't have enough food to eat. Imagine being an actual slave, captured in Africa, brought over to to North America, forced to work. Imagine being an Aztec, child who, got marched up to the Pyramid of the Sun, and they just kill you right there. I mean, the history is filled with... It's violent. It's insanely violent. And what's worse is that the people in history, they didn't have any context, right? They just thought that was normal. I was listening to somebody talk about history, like military history, and they mentioned that there wasn't really that much PTSD. So if you guys don't know what PTSD is, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. And they only really started noticing, like, PTSD, which they called shell shock, in World War I. And they speculated that, World War I was... It followed a time of peace, and the people in history, like the Roman legions and stuff, they were used to death, right? And when you're fighting an enemy face to face, you just accept the fact that you might die. But, you're not in really that much danger. You can kind of see death coming. But when people are firing artillery shells at you and you can't see when death is going to come, that's when PTSD starts to really take place. It's the fear that causes the PTSD, and not necessarily the killing and the death itself, because most historical battles, either one side won completely and the other side was decimated, or very few people died. So, history was filled with death. And I say this to my family all the time, right? I tell them, we won the lottery. Like, we really lucked out. And maybe luck is a bad word for it, but we were born in in the best time in history ever. Not only were we born in the best time in history, we were born in North America. Anybody born in North America, including Mexico, in this century is automatically more privileged than any other human that has ever lived prior to, say, like 1939. I mean, your chances of surviving to age 5 are significantly higher. I mean, childhood mortality was a thing. I'm people died of diseases. Kids died the day after they were born all the time. There are journals from, the 1900s that people have found, and I say this because they were local here, right? Like people coming to Alberta and kind of pioneering the land and farming it and making cattle ranches and stuff like that. And their diaries are filled with stories of just children who are born and they live for 3 days and they die. That would be almost unheard of these days. Children still do die, but nowadays, if a child is born before, if there's a baby born after 24 weeks of pregnancy, there's pretty much a 50% chance that kid's gonna live. And we're not talking about like when 100 years ago, you were born at full term, and there was still a good chance you were gonna die. If you weren't born at full term, you were probably going to die. There's like 100% mortality rate for preemie births. And there was no such thing as C-sections or anything like that. So your chances of just existing on planet Earth are much higher today. I mean, leaving aside the whole abortion thing, you're just more likely to actually grow up. So there's less poverty, less disease. Now there's some bad things too. There are some bad things, and these are things that didn't necessarily exist. These weren't huge problems, 50, 60, 70 years ago. So, for example, communities are much more fragmented than they used to be. Because we have the internet, right? And we have things to entertain us, so we don't need to go and hang out with people. People still do hang out, but it's not nearly as common anymore. Like, honestly, I can't remember the last time. I mean, I can, but it's just not as common for our family to go hang out with another family. I do have some homies that stop by every now and then, and I've got a friend of mine who's messaging me from, a couple hours away, but I very rarely see these people in person. So communities have become much more fragmented, but there are other communities that are forming. They're just online. And online communities, as much as they're great, they're not the same as being in person with somebody. So I don't think that's good. I mean, people who live next to each other should know each other. Now another bad thing is that families are much more broken up than they used to be. Two-parent families used to be the norm, right? It was a shame. It was a shameful thing when you had a child and you weren't married. It was like a scandal. Now it's like just a Tuesday. And I'm not trying to insult single mothers, because it's oftentimes not entirely their fault that they are single. It is the man's fault. I blame men, hugely blame men, for being broken and unwilling to accept their responsibilities. So I'm very hard on boys, and I want them to grow up to be better. But they also are struggling because they didn't have a father figure. So I tell my family all the time, I'm like, you guys, listen, we've won the lottery. I tell my kids this. I'm like, do you guys realize that you raised in a two-parent family in North America? That pretty much puts you on the top. You have all of the advantages and almost none of the disadvantages. So don't ever come to me and complain that your life sucks, because we've basically given you a golden ticket to success. Now it's up to you to make that work out. But, we've taken you as far as we possibly can. Just by virtue of the fact that we are married, you've got a mother and a father at home. Your mother doesn't even work. Like we're surviving off of one income, basically, which is insanely difficult. So, yeah, I like to remind my children that they have it pretty good all the time. Not that I ignore their complaints about things, but I want them to have some perspective on life. Now, here's another bad thing, is that people are really lonely. And it is because of the first two things that this third thing is true. communities are fragmented and families are broken up, which means that people are really just lonely and desperate. This is why people are clinging to identities as their thing, right? People need something that is their, their identity, their community. They want to feel like they're part of something. So I don't blame people for going and joining these furry groups or whatever, right? It's just human nature to want to be part of a group and to be part of a group of people who kind of look at you and respect you. People want to be respected and they want to be in a community. And the last bad thing is that moral standards are kind of a thing of the past. And I'm not talking about religious standards. Yeah, religious standards have slipped a bit, and maybe they were too stern, back in the 50s when Christians actually believed that interracial marriage was bad, which is not in the Bible. But we've kind of gone the opposite direction now. We're like, shoplifting isn't that bad. Go ahead and loot your local, Walmart. Burn it down, man. That's all cool. It's your right to do that. That's not good. That's just going to lead to a broken society. And maybe the society is in the process of slowly breaking. But the whole point of this podcast is to tell you that things, as bad as they get, are still pretty good. And you should feel hope for the future, because there are things that you can do to make your life better. So let's talk about the good things that are happening in 2022. There is much less poverty than there was even 10 years ago. So there are organizations that measure the poverty rate around the world, right? They go to, the poorest countries and they look and see, how are people doing, right? Do they have security? Do they have the ability to buy food? How are people doing? The severe poverty rate has dropped to less than 10%, which is still, in my opinion, too many people living in severe poverty. Like, severe poverty is like, you might die of starvation. Now, the lockdowns sure didn't help that. There's 120 million people added to the severe poverty rate thanks to the lockdowns. But of course, living in North America, we probably don't care much about those people because they're brown and they live somewhere else. And I'm being sarcastic, but that's really how people feel here. They're like, okay, well, we saved the lives of 10 people from dying of COVID, even though they were going to die in 6 months. And we only had to kill 120 million brown people to do it. So, no big deal. Lockdowns basically, brought a lot of people back into poverty. But there is still less poverty overall. And that's because we have more tools, more knowledge. We have more capital. We have people in poor countries, they have access to machines that they may not have had access to before, right? There's small tractors, there's seeds, there's soil improvements, there's all kinds of things, there's medicines that they've had, and the poverty rate is it's dropping. There's also less disease. Maybe you guys don't like vaccines. I've always had a very tumultuous opinion on vaccines. But there is no escaping the fact that, certain vaccines have reduced the incidence of that disease. Even though the death rate was dropping for the measles. So, between 1900 and 1965, the death rate from measles dropped significantly because we had sanitation and we had good food. People who have stronger immune systems can fight off disease, and you can't have a strong immune system unless you're eating properly. We had infant formula, which is important because, kids that can't get enough nutrition might die of disease, right? So the mortality rate from measles went down, but when you look at when the vaccine came out, it went down significantly faster. So although vaccines, I'm a skeptic on vaccines, particularly ones that are for diseases that are not particularly dangerous, like the chicken pox. I don't think that kids need to get 7,000 vaccines, but there are some that are pretty useful. Um, less disease. Less disease overall. Childhood mortality has all but been eliminated. I mean, I can't think of a single family that I know that has lost a baby after it's been born. Now, yes, I have, like pre-birth miscarriage. That's still a thing. I don't know if we'll ever get rid of that because that's more of your body kind of rejecting a child that's not forming correctly. That's as far as I know what a miscarriage is, and it's very sad. But maybe if we had better nutrition, we could eliminate that too. But childhood mortality, just of kids dying at random, has really just been largely eliminated. When kids die, it like makes the news now. It's like, oh, a kid died in their crib, and the whole community knows about it because it's just this big deal. Now, I'm eliminating it completely. Is that possible? No. Like, it gets to a point where it's already so low that you really can't make improvements in the mortality rate without causing other problems as well, right? You could basically imprison kids in their room and do virtual school, never let them ride a bike, never let them go swimming, never let them do anything. You could probably eliminate a few more percentage points of mortality, but at what cost, right? That's not living, that's just existence. We weren't meant to live in a matrix with no risk. But I am happy to be living in a time where there's much less risk. Life is safer on all fronts. And one of the greatest things that has come out in this century, or this decade, I should say, and really just in the last 7 or 8 years, is that you can run a business literally from a cave in the mountains. And when I say cave in the mountains, I'm talking like Afghanistan style, right? Like you can join the ghost of Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Pakistan running a business. And I know people who are in Pakistan who are running a business online. Pakistan is actually a pretty modern country, although there are some wild areas in Pakistan, just like there's wild areas in every country. But you can run any business from anywhere, and it's made possible by the internet. Now, the internet has gotten a lot better, and one of the things that I think is an up and coming is satellite and Starlink. So, for all of the hate that Elon Musk is getting about his activities on Twitter, he's an interesting guy for sure. Kind of like him. But he has come up with this Starlink thing, and he's launching these satellites into space, and they're going to orbit the Earth and provide us with internet no matter where you are. And right now you have to buy this gigantic satellite dish. But just like everything in technology, they're miniaturizing these components, right? So eventually you will just have a cell phone, and it'll be running off of Starlink. Right? You don't need a dish or anything like that. They'll have some way of getting the signal from your cell phone to the sky, and it's insanely fast, and it's also available literally everywhere. If you can see the sky, you can get Starlink internet. So you could put your satellite dish outside of your cave, or you could run it up to the top of the cave entrance. You could sit in your cave, run a solar panel for your laptop, and you could run your business from that cave in the mountains. That's never been possible before. So, I mean, it's just a great time to be alive. There's so much possibility. And, yeah, I mean, there's going to be hard times for people. People are going to lose their jobs. But you've got so many options right now. You've got so many options that you should never feel discouraged just because one option isn't available. There are so many other options. I mean, there was a time when, if you lost your job in a small town in the middle of, northern England in the 1800s, and they didn't need you, there's no other options for you. You just kind of just slowly starve to death, or you try to move to another place. And there was no cars, so you just walk. I mean, times have been much worse. Much, much worse. So don't feel discouraged about the way things are going, because it is getting better, even if we have some setbacks along the way. So here are some things that you can do for your own life to maintain all of the good things and get rid of all the bad things that I was talking about in this episode. So first of all, you got to run your own business. Don't exclusively rely on one source of income. That is the 1950s model of making life work, right? That the whole one income thing, that's a time that ship has sailed. It's not going to be a thing anymore. But the beauty is that you can run your own business with like half an hour a day. Just get on your computer, create some listings, fire up some products, and you can have a business where you're earning, maybe you're not earning a full-time income, but you're earning a good part-time income on your own time from your own home. So run your own business. The next thing is maintain a physical connection to the people around you. Talk to your neighbors. Like, physically go and say hello to them. When you see them drive by, wave at them. I don't care if you hate them. I don't care if they hate you. You're living next to them. These are people that, if something happens, you might have to rely on them. So start building a relationship with the people around you. I mean, yeah, everybody's got the one neighbor who's kind of a jerk, but you've got more than one neighbor. Now, if you don't have more than one neighbor and you're living out in the middle of nowhere, yeah, it can be a little rough. I actually had that situation when we lived on a farm. We had a quarter section, and this wasn't even that long ago. 2018 is when we sold that. But we had a quarter section of land, and the guy living across the road, he was just a weird guy. And we had some beefs with each other. But in the end, he was still, I had to ask him for help a few times, and he showed up. So I had to humble myself and say, listen, I was wrong about this. He was like, oh, you've got broken machines out in your yard. Maybe you can clean that up. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I can clean that up. And I did. And I proved to him that I could be a good neighbor. So, and then I told him, is like, hey, your dogs are coming and terrorizing my kids. Can you please stop them? And he's like, sure thing. I'll do the best I can. So he did that too. So it's a give and take with neighbors, but maintain that physical connection. Don't ignore them. Don't pretend they're not there. Don't pretend that the people living around you don't exist or they don't matter. Those are the people that matter the most. Number 3, don't let your kids drown in media, on YouTube, in their screens. Force them to go outside. Force them to spend time with people. Sign them up for fun things. Take them places. It doesn't have to cost money. Just take them places. Do fun things with them. Make family time a thing again. Don't let them be lost in the internet. That's a bad place to get lost. Every kid that I've ever known that they talk about on the news that's done something terrible, like shoot up a school, it's, these are kids that are lonely and they don't have anywhere to go. Their families ignore them. People make fun of them. Of course they're going to turn out to be broken people. And it doesn't mean that every broken person is a murderer, but every murderer is a broken person, right? So don't let people be broken around you. And, of course, the last thing is, don't sweat the small stuff, right? There are small things that happen that suck, and it's going to annoy you. Maybe the wind blew your barbecue over and it broke the handle off. Well, that's annoying, but glue it back on and move on with your life. Somebody might do something to you that is just unfair, and it was totally uncool for them to do that. Don't let that destroy your peace. Now, particularly things that you can't change. And this is a hard lesson I had to learn during the lockdowns, because, I don't know if the FBI is listening to this, but there was times when I considered only half jokingly, like actually storming like government buildings to force them to end the lockdowns. It was that miserable. And I know I'm not the only one who thought that. Like, it was rough. But that wouldn't have helped. Getting myself shot in a attempted overthrow of the government, not really a recipe for future success. So I'm glad, I didn't do that. And I wasn't, I never planned it out or anything like that. I just was so angry that I just thought, man, somebody's got to do something about this. But the thing that you need to do is own your life, right? Don't try to change things that you can't change. And don't sit there and be miserable about that. Make your own life. If you're stuck in a cage, you're stuck in a prison cell, you can't do anything about that. So if I were in prison, I would be forced to make the best of my situation. And I would try. I can't say that it would be always great. And I know there are people living in prison right now. I feel bad for those people. Some of them don't necessarily need to be in prison. Some of them probably should be, put on the electric chair instead of prison. And some people didn't really do much. Maybe they possessed marijuana or something stupid like that. They probably shouldn't be in prison. But they have to make the best of it. So you just absolutely must look at your situation and say, what do I have control over, and what can I do right now? All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hopefully you got something out of this episode. Join me again next week for more talking about business, print on demand, and life. Cheers.